I became the conductor of my apartment building by opening a cardboard box in the basement. It happened on a rainy Saturday in Seattle, the kind that turns the sidewalk shiny and makes the coffee shop windows sweat. I went down to the laundry room with a bag of quarters and noticed the box near the vending machine, right next to the bulletin board where people sell couches and offer dog walking. Sharp letters on the lid read, "Free. Please take." Inside lay a trumpet with a stuck valve, a violin with one string, a dented tambourine, and a stack of sheet music swollen from moisture. The box smelled like old carpet and a hint of metal. It looked like a tiny yard sale for a band that had fallen asleep and missed its own show. I carried the box upstairs, partly to keep it dry, partly because I have a habit of rescuing lost things. My studio was already full of the usual rescues: a lamp from a curb in Capitol Hill, a rug that looked better in the store than it did in my living room, a plant that tolerated my personality. I put the instruments on my table and made some coffee. The violin was lighter than I expected, like a toy, but the wood had a warmth to it. The trumpet had a dent that gave it a pout. I ran my thumb along the tambourine's frame and liked the dry rattle it gave in response. That afternoon, I propped the building's front door open with a brick and set the instruments on the lobby table with a note. Found in basement. Anyone want to make some noise tonight? 7 p.m. roof. I signed it with my apartment number because the building had 30 units and anonymity always feels a little too big. The manager, a quiet man named Vic who wore a mariner's cap all year, looked at my note, lifted his eyebrows, and shrugged. He believed in letting people figure things out. At 6:55, I climbed the stairs with a folding chair and the tambourine. The roof smelled like rain and the lake. The skyline made a soft edge against the clouds. I worried I had made a strange invitation and would sit alone, a one-man percussion section, the kind neighbors whisper about. Then the door swung open, and out came a small parade. First, a kid from the third floor with purple headphones around his neck and the trumpet under his arm. After him, Lila from 5B, a nurse with a calm voice, carrying the violin, the bow repaired with blue painter's tape. Behind them, Mr. Rodriguez from 2A, retired postal worker, brought a plastic bucket and drumsticks he said he kept for his grandchildren. Even Vic showed up, holding a harmonica that looked like it had been in his pocket for years. We formed a circle of folding chairs. The kid with the headphones introduced himself as Amir. He said he had watched enough videos to make the trumpet make a sound, which he proved by blowing a note that was half proud, half complaint. Lila tuned the single string, slid the bow, and found a thin singing line. Mr. Rodriguez tapped a patient heartbeat on the bucket. I shook the tambourine like the world's shyest shaker. No one asked what we were doing. The rain stopped on schedule, which felt like a gift. We played on, trading sounds like neighbors trading sugar. A woman I had seen in the mailroom brought a tiny keyboard and learned our rhythm. A couple in workout clothes clapped along and then left for tacos. A new tenant named Charlie turned the sheet music into paper fans and passed them out. The wind picked up and the fans fluttered like birds. By the time it was dark enough to see our breath, we had 2 songs that almost sounded like songs. We laughed when we finished each one, surprised to be there, surprised to be together. I felt the way I feel when I find a seat on a crowded bus and someone nods as if they saved it for me. On the way back down the stairs, Amir asked if we'd meet again next Saturday. I said yes before I realized I had volunteered to run a rooftop orchestra. The word orchestra felt too fancy for bucket drums and a one-string violin, but it also made my chest lift a little. I fell asleep that night with the tambourine on the floor. The door to my studio cracked open, the sound of rain soft on the alley, and a new idea in the building's air. The next morning I bought small sticky notes and posted them on the mailboxes. Roof music next Saturday, 7 p.m. All welcome. No talent required. I underlined no talent because it was the truest thing I could promise. During the week, I fixed the trumpet valve with dish soap and patience. I added a second string to the violin. I downloaded an app that tuned things and learned what an F sounded like when it finally behaved. It felt like planting seeds in a concrete pot and hoping something green would insist on itself. I started to look forward to the evenings when I passed people in the stairwell and we shared the secret of a plan not yet real. On Friday, I got a text from an unknown number. Do we need a permit to be loud? It was Lila. She added a peace sign emoji, which made it feel less official. I promised to check. I Googled rooftop noise in Seattle and learned that if we kept the music to conversational level, we were fine. I pictured a city worker measuring the volume of our bucket drum with a ruler and laughed at my desk. I sent the info back to Lila. She replied with another emoji and a single word. Good. I closed the laptop and tapped the tambourine with my knuckle. It answered with a sound that felt like a yes. We didn't become great. We became better. That was enough. Week 2 on the roof felt less like a random invitation and more like a standing date. People brought chairs this time. Someone brought a string of patio lights and clipped them to the railing. Vic found an extension cord that he said was from a long-ago barbecue. We were still mostly out of tune and unsure, but the air had changed. We knew where to sit, where to place the bucket, where the wind lifted our paper fans and sent them skating toward the corners. Amir learned to roll notes on the trumpet, a little smoother each pass. Lila came after a 12-hour shift and still found the patience to tune by ear. Mr. Rodriguez brought a second bucket and created a bass and snare system that made him grin. A grad student named Ben from 6C showed up with a stand-up bass that he said lived in his closet like a quiet roommate. He played soft, respectful notes, the kind that made everyone else sound more legitimate. I kept time, shook the tambourine, added a cheap shaker I found at a thrift store on Broadway, and tried to count us in without looking like I was telling anyone what to do. I started a playlist of songs we might aim toward. Stand By Me felt possible. Lean On Me felt tempting. We failed our way through both, then found a groove on a simple blues progression. People heard us from the street and stopped at the crosswalk to listen. A woman walking her dog waved from the sidewalk. The dog sat and tipped its head. It felt like a city version of a campfire, the stack of small sounds making a warmth that did not need flames. That week I visited a shop in Fremont that repaired instruments. The owner had a beard that looked like it had grown at the same pace as the dust on his shelves. He sold me a pack of violin strings and a new set of harmonica reeds for Vic. I told him about the rooftop. He nodded like he had seen stranger things. On my way out, he handed me a pair of soft drum mallets. For your bucket, man, he said. I paid in cash and left with a brown paper bag that made me feel like I had just bought the ingredients for a better Saturday. The building began to rearrange itself around the music. Neighbors who used to nod in the hall now stopped to talk about meter and snacks. Someone left a plate of brownies on the lobby table with a note that said, "For the band." It felt wild to be called that. One afternoon, I ran into a man in a blazer I didn't recognize. He said he had just moved in from Spokane and asked if this building always came with a club. I told him it did now. He laughed and said he had a ukulele in a box somewhere. By the fourth weekend, we had something like a set. We could play a 5-minute song without anyone bailing. We had a silence for when someone needed to solo, even if solo meant a brave series of almost notes. The lights glowed. The city hummed along. I learned who preferred the left side of the circle, which chair wobbled, which outlet hissed. We were ordinary, and it felt like a miracle. Lila's idea came during a break when the sun pressed itself low on the buildings and our instruments rested on our laps. She said we could try a block party. Just a small one, for our street, a few tables, a string of borrowed lights. and our music. The suggestion sat between us and grew warm, like a cup of tea left on a windowsill. I pictured permits and cones and a flyer taped to the lamppost. I pictured hauling buckets and folding chairs downstairs. I pictured the wince of a first sour note in front of people we didn't know. I also pictured the last chord when we would look up and see a small crowd, some of them smiling like they had stumbled into something gentle. We divided tasks in a way that made sense. Lila would call the city and ask about permits. Vic would talk to the deli about lending us their orange barricades. Mr. Rodriguez said he knew a guy with a grill. I volunteered to make flyers and build a tiny website with the date and time. The name came easily, Rooftop Downstairs. We set a date 3 weeks out, a Sunday in August when the forecast claimed the sky would behave. I felt a nervous lift in my stomach, the same feeling I get when I say yes to something my past self would have avoided. The next weeks went fast. I practiced counting in, practiced smiling when I missed a beat, practiced making a mistake look like a choice. At work, my mind drifted to chord charts and extension cords. I used my lunch break to buy a box of cheap kazoos. On my way back, I crossed South Lake Union and saw a couple take a selfie with the water and thought how everyone needs proof they were somewhere. I decided the block party would be my proof. It would be ours. The day before the event, we did a trial run on the roof. It was windy, and the wind found every loose thing and sent it walking. Amir's trumpet case tried to escape, and Lila chased it with a laugh. Ben wrapped his bass in a blanket like it was a guest who had stayed too late. I taped the corners of set lists to the chairs. The lights held. We weren't great. We were ready enough. The morning of the block party started with birds and a truck that delivered folding tables. The neighborhood woke up slowly, like a person sitting on the edge of a bed. I set orange cones on the street with Vic and learned he had a precise way of placing them, 2 feet from the curb, tips lined up like little pyramids bowing toward each other. Mr. Rodriguez brought the grill and an ice chest the size of a bathtub. Lila had a clipboard and the kind of energy that makes other people look organized just by standing near her. We strung lights from the deli to the bike rack to a mailbox wrapped in duct tape. Someone's cousin showed up with a ladder. Ben rolled his bass out like a parade float. Amir warmed up on the edge of the sidewalk and drew a small audience of kids who hopped in place with the notes. I put the tambourine on my chair and walked the block, checking for small disasters. The weather was perfect, the sky a polite blue, the air generous. At noon, the first neighbors came downstairs. They brought lawn chairs and dogs and one folding wagon that produced chips, watermelon, and a juggling set. The deli sent out a tray of something that steamed in the sun and smelled like garlic. A man I had never seen before set up a chessboard on the curb. The building across the street hung a banner from their balcony that read, "Go Music." It looked like a sports slogan dressed up for art class. Our set began with a simple 2-chord groove, the one we knew best. It felt good to make that first sound and hear it bounce off the bricks. No roof toward the clouds this time, just wires and air and faces. I counted us in, and for once my voice came out steady. We locked into the rhythm. Lila bowed with her chin lifted, the line sure. Amir stepped forward and let 2 clean notes float into the heat. Mr. Rodriguez broke into a grin that made his eyes look 10 years younger. Ben found a pulse that made everything feel inevitable. Halfway through the second song, a breaker somewhere tripped. The lights blinked off, the tiny keyboard went quiet, an extension cord sighed. The sound turned from amplified to naked in an instant. For a beat, everything held its breath. Then Vic lifted the harmonica, found a note, and played it like a steady hand on a shoulder. Mr. Rodriguez beat the bucket with the new mallets, deep and certain. Lila leaned into the bow. Amir adjusted his stance and pushed air through brass until it shimmered. I shook the tambourine with both hands. the jingles bright in the sun. The street came closer, as if everyone leaned in at the same time. It turned into the best part of the day. We kept it acoustic. Kids danced in a line. An older couple led a slow step that looked like a shared memory. A teenager balanced on a skateboard and clapped. Someone started a clapback rhythm, and we followed. The deli's owner arrived with a pitcher of lemonade and poured cups like a bartender at a very wholesome bar. The man with the chessboard lifted a pawn and nodded along. I felt something open behind my ribs and stay open. Between songs, I walked to the edge of the crowd and saw our building looking back at us. Windows filled with people who chose to stay home and still be part of it. A woman I recognized from the 6th floor held up her cat and made it wave a paw. A man from the next block leaned on his bike and shouted that we sounded good. I believed him more than I expected. I looked down at my shoes and felt the faint shake of the bucket drum through the sidewalk. It felt like standing on a small bridge that was learning to trust its cables. We played for an hour, took a break, then played again. The sun moved from one edge of the street to the other, and the lights, now only decoration, swung in a small wind. The kazoos came out for the last song, and the whole block turned into a comedy orchestra, buzzing and laughing. The melody, so clear anyway. At the end, we held the last note longer than we needed to, because the last note meant the end. When we finally let it go, someone cheered, then more people cheered, and for a second the sound felt too big for the street. Cleanup moved fast, the way it does when many hands know where things go. The cones returned to a neat stack. The grill cooled and rolled away. Ben's bass disappeared into its blanket. Lila handed me the clipboard with a crooked smile and said we had done it. Vic clapped me on the back and said his harmonica was having the best year of its life. I sat on the curb with a paper plate of cut fruit and watched the neighborhood return to its regular shape. That night, the building fell quiet early. The city kept its hum, but inside, I could feel a tired happiness, as if the walls exhaled. I put the tambourine back on my table and turned it in my hands. The cardboard box from the basement sat folded in my closet, done with its job. I thought about how small beginnings hide in ordinary places. A laundry room, a dented instrument, a note taped to a lobby table. I thought about the way people drift toward each other when given the tiniest reason. In bed, I listened to a familiar Seattle rain tap the window. The roof waited above me, 12 steps, and a door I now knew by heart. The street outside waited for next time, not demanding, just patient. I did not make a big plan. I did not write a mission statement. I decided to keep the door open with a brick and see who walked through. I fell asleep thinking of the sound a tambourine makes when the player breathes in, holds the frame, and waits for the downbeat. The simple trust that the next note will arrive.